So we formed a relationship in Sochi. We talked on the phone about all kinds of matters. But meanwhile, things in Ukraine were starting to heat up. December 21st of January. I'm not too preoccupied with it at the time. I'm not familiar with the map and Ukraine. Not a major issue to me. I'm overseas. I don't remember if it was Bahrain or the Emirates. And the Americans are saying that war is imminent. There's a debate whether or not to invade. So what I focus on is getting Israelis out as quickly as possible. I think it was on the 24th from Ukraine, yes, because I'll tell you something in general. When it comes to the world, foreign policy and all that, my focus is on Israel's interests. That may be a narrow view, but my primary focus is on your people, my people. Soon the strategy will come to light in this regard. The war breaks out. Do you want to get the Israelis out or the Jews? The Israelis at this point, okay. And based on the policy, are you thinking that this is war? They're going in and the entire world thinks that this invasion will be a piece of cake. There's not that much talk of conquering Ukraine, more of defeating Ukraine. Everyone knows that Zelensky is finished. America suggests Zelensky seek refuge with them. This is public information. I started studying the topic. When a new topic comes up, I want to understand what the strategy of each side can be. But the world fully understands there's no competition in this regard. The war breaks out, and I'm instantly between a rock and a hard place. On the one hand, the Americans clearly expect, this is largely led by the Americans, that we all rally for Ukraine. On the other hand, I have two opposing interests. One is our routine activity in Syria. Once or twice a week, we attack the Iranian presence in Syria. And Russia, the superpower, has S-300 there. If they press the button, Israeli pilots will fall. Who will save them? Who will rescue the next Ron Arad? Biden? Zelensky? It'll be my problem. So all the talk of being on the right side of history, I get it, but I have a national need. Second, there are many Jews in Ukraine and Russia. And as a prime minister of the Jewish state, I have a responsibility. So what do I do? I came up with a strategy that says, when I'm pressured on two sides, I take a third. And the third was creating contact with both sides and trying to mediate. I knew that the trust I'd formed with Putin was a rare commodity. America didn't know how to communicate at the time. Neither does it know today. I don't think there was anyone else who had the trust of both sides. Maybe Erdogan to a degree. That's one thing. The second thing, I set a rule, a lot of humanitarian aid, but no supply of weapons. I informed Putin of whatever I did. I told Putin, I'm setting up a field hospital in Lvov. In a phone call? Yes. I just want to let you know. So he said, if you give me your word that it won't be a hiding place for weapons or soldiers, that it won't be used for military purposes, then no problem. Just tell me where it is. I'll ensure it's not bombed. This was before the meeting. I think so. How do you experience him in phone calls? Very matter of fact. There are two very different narratives. He has one narrative and perception. Zelensky and the West have another. The West sees Putin as an imperialist who wants to take over more places, once Georgia, once here, once there. And if we don't stop him in Ukraine, he'll go on to Poland and the Baltics. Putin's perception was, as early as the meeting in Sochi, even more so here. Wait, when the wall came down, we reached an agreement with NATO that they wouldn't expand NATO and would not touch the belt countries that envelop Russia. Don't bring me NATO, my enemy or rival. And why are you introducing Ukraine into NATO? Yes. The story goes much deeper. You know, the Americans, on a side note, the Americans have a centuries-old doctrine called the Monroe Doctrine, whereby the hegemony over the Western Hemisphere, North and South America, belongs to the USA. As early as 200 years ago, they didn't want France and Britain there. Don't come here. And to a degree, that's Putin's perception. Don't come here, this is my backyard. I don't presume to judge the perceptions. What I care about is Israel's national interests. And I knew that if I don't take some other action, I'll be forced to supply weapons and I'm endangering the Jews. And so I called the Americans, Blinken, Biden, and Sullivan, the National Security Advisor, and said, I have Putin's ear. I can be a pipeline. Zelensky initiated the request to contact Putin. Zelensky called me and asked me to contact Putin. I have the protocol. What for? To help. As the war is going on, yes, and he was in distress. Keep in mind, he knows that his days are numbered and that he'll be killed. It wasn't hard to kill him. The Russians had demands. One was denazification, meaning replacement of the leader. And I assume the world understood that this means killing him. There was a disarmament, emptying Ukraine out of weapons and army. There was 5 to 6 demands at first, so Zelensky calls you, can you help me? At the time, I was meeting with Scholz. The new Chancellor of Germany who replaced Angela Merkel. They're both excellent and very different. Scholz is a man of few words. Not that Angela was a big talker, but You're meeting him in Germany? No, in Jerusalem. Oh, right. So we have the first meeting. And he's very distressed because there's the gas issue. He fears for Germany's energy and the ramifications. I tell him about my discussions with Putin and Putin says we can reach a ceasefire. So I start talks back and forth. Putin, Zelensky, Zelensky, Putin on the phone. Yes. What happens in these phone calls? What's your suggestion? What happens is this. Drafts are exchanged. Not only through us, directly as well. They're in Belarus in a city called Gomo. There are 2 negotiation teams, Russia and Ukraine, that the world looked down on. But I considered it a good thing that they were talking and exchanging and I try to find solutions. I'm very skilled at negotiations. From my corporate life and politics, and I can procure deals. Moreover, I realized we're on borrowed time. I said that we're on the verge of another Kafkana. I'll explain what I mean to the listeners. An unplanned security escalation in extreme situation will occur, whereby many civilians will be killed, and then it will be very hard to reach a ceasefire. It was very hard as it is, yes. So I called it the Kafkana affair. I explained it to the Americans. Everything I did was fully coordinated with Biden, with Macron, with Boris Johnson, with Schultz, and obviously with Zelensky. But did you think they could succeed? I have a debate about that with the Americans. I think there was a chance, and I'll explain. They say there was no chance. But there are two questions. Was there a chance, and was it justifiable? Maybe they didn't want you to succeed. Talk about the compromise you thought you could achieve. Before talking about the meeting itself, there were a few issues. The major issues, when I met with Putin, he made two big concessions that are obvious now. They weren't at the time, during the first meeting. No, at the meeting on Saturday. I'll go into that, but first, he renounced the denazification, i.e., taking out Zelensky. Yes. He said it in those words. That's why it's so a leader's life is invaluable. And I knew that Zelensky was under threat. He was in a secret bunker. So 3-4 hours into the meeting, I'm getting to the meeting now. I ask, what's with... Are you going to kill Zelensky? He said, I won't kill Zelensky. Then I said, I have to understand that you're giving your word that you won't kill Zelensky. I won't kill Zelensky. After the meeting in the car from the Kremlin to the airport, I contact Zelensky by WhatsApp or Telegram. Didn't you fear the Russians would see? No, he has no problem because No, the premise is they can see, so you call him. I call Zelensky and say, I came out of a meeting, he's not going to kill you. He asks, are you sure? 100%, he won't kill you. 2 hours later, Zelensky went to his office and filmed himself there on his phone. I'm not afraid. Anyways, that was one concession. The other was that he renounced disarmament of Ukraine. Zelensky made a big concession that Saturday too. I think it was the second Saturday after the war broke out. The war broke out on a Thursday, and the next Saturday I was in Moscow. Zelensky relinquished joining NATO. He said, I'm renouncing that. These are huge steps on each side. Huge concessions. The war broke out because of the demand to join NATO, and Zelensky said, I'm renouncing that. Then, what's left? A lot. There was... The most complex issue is the territorial issue. Donbass, the Crimea Peninsula, Crimea, the corridor that was forming between the two, in Mariupol. And the second issue was how will Ukraine protect itself and guarantees? Ukraine demanded of Russia that it be able to get security guarantees from America, France, all the big ones. And there was an argument because to Russia, a guarantee is a pact. It's no different than NATO. This is where I brought my experience. I gave it a lot of thought and said, the negotiation is unreasonable. because they're negotiating over something they don't have. There's the joke about a guy trying to sell the Brooklyn Bridge to passers-by. This guy did exist. 100 years ago, he sold. They don't have the Brooklyn Bridge. I said that because America will give you guarantees. It will commit that in 7 years. If Russia violates something, it will send soldiers after leaving Afghanistan and all that. I said, Vladimir, it won't happen. You won't get any guarantees. Why are you negotiating? Then I suggested what I called the Israeli model. We don't have guarantees. I said, I'm the Prime Minister of Israel. We don't have guarantees from anyone. If someone invades us tomorrow, nobody has assured us, and no one will come to save us. What we do have is a strong, independent army that can protect itself. So let's forget about these guarantees and discuss the parameters for building a military force. What kind of weapons, what planes, how many officers, soldiers, because Russia doesn't want Ukraine. This was a cognitive breakthrough that they both accepted. Again, it took time. And then you're discussing which missiles. These are assault missiles. What do they need those for? The territorial issue is, and this is pre-Kafkana, pre-Bucha, yeah? The Bucha massacre, once that happened, I said, it's over. I saw solutions in that regard too. I'd rather not go into that. They are primarily related to postponing the argument by 99 years. All kinds of solutions in the middle. Like David Avidan said, everything takes time. Time takes everything, yes. To ethics, I knew from our rounds versus Gaza versus Hezbollah, it's very hard to reach a ceasefire. Why is that? As usual, because the internal politics of each side, neither side can seem to be giving up, to be losing, to be weak. So after Zelensky went to war, he didn't go to war. After sustaining a blow, sustaining this war, now he'll back down? Does Putin say anything to you that you deem pragmatic? He was very pragmatic. So was Zelensky. He wasn't messianic. No. Give me an example of pragmatism. An example of pragmatism, I won't disclose things I shouldn't. But he totally understood Zelensky's political constraints. And Zelensky was pragmatic too. It doesn't start at once. You have to peel the onion. In every negotiation, each side is all bravado. Rip him apart. I'll rip him apart. I'll do this, I'll do that. Fine, okay. It's a phase you can't skip. But once you say, I understand, and you understand the perplexities, then you can gradually get to the crux of the matter. Let's try to resume a chronological description. You leave on Sunday. I must say, this is very indicative of your personality, striving to go there. I mean, it's so far-fetched. Why do you even go there? That's who you are. I understand at that point that there's no one else to mediate. Amazing. There isn't. It positions you at a high level of global endeavoring. Suddenly, you're the man the world is talking about. With this historic role, and you say to yourself, later we'll gauge if it's true and why it didn't work out, but you say, we have this window of opportunity. We're preventing what we see now, millions of refugees, casualties, a country being destroyed, and I can do something about it. I'm cautious. What odds did you give it? 50%. Was it 50%? I think so. And all this right after a call with Putin. Putin says to you, come? Yes, he says come. It was scheduled for a Saturday. We tried to change that, but I didn't hesitate. It was preserving life on a global scope. And keep in mind, All my endeavors are protecting Israel from pressure that can harm us, instead of being on one side or another. You're the mediator, so you're not part of, right, the third path. Did it cross your mind? Yes, yes. That's thinking outside of the box. Yes. Not on either side. I'm the mediator, right? If I take sides, I can't be a fair mediator. Why didn't it work out? Hold on. Then we travel in complete secrecy. In this decrepit plane from Israel, through the Kazakh region, the stands, because we couldn't fly over the Black Sea, a very long route. We pray and recite the Sabbath blessings. It was very moving. It was very cramped too, because the plane wasn't a private plane that we leased. Did Mossad arrange the trip? Mossad and Hulata. The poor things. My guys are sitting on... It wasn't comfy. We were extremely cramped. We land at the Moscow airport. Several officers welcome us and we go to the Kremlin. By the way, it was my first time in Russia. Besides Sochi, first time in Moscow. It was a cold day. I think it was raining. I see the Kremlin. We go to this huge waiting area. And I prepare my strategy in my mind. I forgot to say that, meanwhile, I studied everything in depth. The history. I read a book on the history of Ukraine and Russia to understand. I consulted with former leaders who dealt with this. I consulted lots. I get Russian experts, negotiation experts. Because when you get into something, I knew the name of each village, Donbass, and the history. What happened in 2014 and 2009, what happened all those years. Because you can't come in the middle of the story. It's also important in terms of reliability vis-a-vis the leaders. They have to understand that you understand them. You're not agreeing with them, you understand. Then we waited outside. There were bowls with chocolates and cakes. Yes, I definitely enjoyed those cakes. I think it showed, huh? There was a time. Then I went in to see Putin. Remember, this is at the height of COVID. We sat at both ends of the table. He was scared of COVID, right? I don't know. He stayed 20 minutes away. There was a distance and there was a mic and a speaker next to me. There was the Russian interpreter and Elkin. They sat fairly far away from the table and translated. And we started talking. I understood the basic needs of each side. Again, there were the initial phases at first, and obviously I can't go into detail. I'm just telling you what I can. By the way, I think it's the first time I'm telling all this. And when you peel away, I was under the impression that both sides very much wanted a ceasefire. And as I said, at that meeting, Putin made two big concessions after the original demands. He renounced disarmament and denazification. And I say to myself, wow, this is a huge shift. So he's not gung-ho to fight at all costs. No, he has goals to achieve. That's the impression I got, yes. You have to be cautious. Someone can always put on an act. I'm describing how I saw it. I left very optimistic because he renounced joining NATO, which was the reason for the invasion. Putin said, "Tell me you're not joining NATO. I won't invade." He renounced his demands. Then begins the... Then I update everyone one after the other. You go to Germany, right? From there, I go to Germany. My first time in Germany. I made a point of never setting foot in Germany because of the Holocaust. Obviously, I don't blame today's German people. I arrive at Scholz's office. I'm there with Shimrit, the political advisor. She did a great job through and through. I must say, both she and Eyal Haluta were skeptical. What are you doing? Wait, take it slow. They're young people. The three of you. Not that young, but they're in their 40s. They are not 70. With a political background, millions of conflicts, but they're very intelligent, polite, and they think I'm going too fast. And I disagree. I say we're going for it. Why is it so important to go to Germany? Because Germany is the player. Germany and France are the major players in Europe. And in order to procure an agreement, everyone has to do something. There are so many things to do. So I had dinner with him. I got kosher food. We sat with the National Security Advisor. We were taken to the airport by helicopter. It was weird flying over Berlin in a helicopter. But in all the trips I went over, I wrote down what happened because I couldn't in real time. I wrote a protocol of what we discussed and what the next steps would be, what the disagreements are in the negotiations and what everyone has to do. From there, I think that together, I'm not sure, we updated the Americans and Macron. The Americans? Biden himself, or... No, usually it was Jake Sullivan, the National Security Advisor. Sometimes Biden, sometimes Blinken. They're very tight there, yes. And Boris Johnson. You know, each leader has their way. Boris was... We can divide the spectrum of leaders. Who's tending more towards, now we have to fight Putin because we mustn't reward the bad guys, right? And who says forget the war, everyone loses, right? Boris Johnson adopted the aggressive line. Macron and Scholz were more pragmatic. And Biden was both. And that's it. Then I return to Israel and the negotiation marathon of drafts begins. Now, your office deals with this, not the foreign ministry or the NSC. And I do everything vis-a-vis the NSC and with Shimrit. By the way, I noticed that throughout the Russia-Ukraine crisis, Bibi didn't attack me. Interesting. I think he realized we conducted a very intelligent policy. We went back and forth, and then... I'll say this in the broad sense. I think there was a legitimate decision by the West to keep striking Putin and not... Strike Putin? Putin was striking Ukraine. Hold on, yes. But given, the more aggressive approach, I'll tell you something. I can't say if they were wrong. Maybe the other thugs in the world would see it. My position at the time in this regard, it's not a national Israeli interest, unlike the consulate or Iran. When I'm concerned about Israel, I stand firm, yes. Here, I don't have a say. I'm just the mediator. But I turn to America in this regard. I don't do as I please. Anything I did was coordinated down to the last detail. with the US, Germany, France. So they stopped it? Basically, yes. They stopped it. And I thought they were wrong. In retrospect, it's too soon to know. The advantages and disadvantages, the downside of the war going on, is the casualties in Ukraine and Russia. It's a very harsh blow to Ukraine, the country. There will have to be a huge restoration of the infrastructures, like the Marshall Plan. The negative impact on the export of wheat and food to the Middle East, although that was partially taken care of. The rise in energy costs, which puts heavy pressure on the democracies. Then there's the immigration too, no? If there's hunger in Africa, we'll see immigration in Europe, which will threaten Europe. On the other hand, and I'm not being cynical, there's a statement here after very many years. President Biden created an alliance vis-a-vis an aggressor. In general perception, and this reflects on other arenas such as China, Taiwan, and there are consequences. It's too soon to know. I'm not saying I have one claim. I claim there was a good chance of reaching a ceasefire had they not curbed it, but I'm not sure. But I'm not claiming it was the right thing. In real time, I thought the right thing was a ceasefire. Now I can't say. Maybe it was rewarding the thug too quickly. Maybe it would have conveyed the wrong message to the other countries. Statesmanship is very complex, and there are things I don't want to go into. Why it was the right thing or not, in terms of Israel too, in many aspects, but either way, I'm very proud. I was relentless about setting up a field hospital in Lvov. They didn't get why I'm so gung-ho about it. Then the foreign minister took on it. Yair Lapid took it on with Nitzan and got it done. That was a huge source of pride. We're helping. And another thing, it's very legitimate that Netanyahu, who's entering office with very different data compared to 10 months ago, will form a different policy. It can be changed. The policy was right. It led Israel safely for 10 months to where it is now. And any change is legitimate. Amazing.